So people trying to trap Jesus into some kind of response to a question is really nothing new. We hear it several times throughout Scripture, but most of the time it's really just the Pharisees come, trying to trap Jesus in something dealing with their own law that they believe will turn the people against them. But in today's gospel reading, what we hear is the Pharisees have even brought in the Herodians with them. The question that some of you are probably wondering, who are the Herodians? And there's a lot of people throughout commentaries that have written to go, no one's actually totally sure who they are, but largely probably somebody considered they're connected with the state, with Herod, who also then would also know of the fact that they have some kind of loyalty or responsibility to Caesar in that region as well. So you've basically got the religious law and the civil law who are there together, and normally the Pharisees and the Herodians didn't get along, but if it was going to be against Jesus, then at least it seemed worth it. Because one thing they had in common was neither one of them were thrilled with what Jesus was preaching. So you've got the Pharisees and the Herodians, and they ask Jesus this question about taxes. Now, even taxes aren't particularly new in this conversation. We go back to John the Baptist when he was preaching and people asked him what he should do. And tax collectors came and asked John, what are we supposed to do? And he says, don't collect more than you're supposed to, be fair in what you do. And then it seemed to be pretty instrumental that Jesus chose Matthew, a tax collector, to be one of his disciples. And we even have the story of the temple tax that is paid. And so what it would seem is the idea that's all wrapped up around taxes is not a particularly new concept there. What might be really new is the fact that people there, they weren't as thrilled as paying taxes as we are today. I mean, all I hear from people today is the joy of taxation and all of that it means for us. Now, clearly, as we look at that, we realize that something's happening maybe beyond just the grumbling about paying taxes, and it certainly appears to be. Because as you have the religious authority and the civil authority asking Jesus this question, it's not anything new for Jesus to come up with a clever response when people are trying to trap him into some kind of response. And so he asks about how it is that they pay taxes. Well, there's a coin that you use to pay taxes. And on that coin is stamped the image of Caesar, the emperor. And then there would be an inscription on it that would refer to Caesar, the emperor, as being God. Now, this would be a real affront to the Jews, to be able to have to pay taxes to Caesar, who they considered a tyrant, and to use a coin stamped with Caesar's image on it with the words prescribing that Caesar himself is God. There are so many ways this is an affront to the people that what the Pharisees wanted Jesus to say was, there's no way we should carry those coins around with us. There's no good reason why a Jewish person would have the image of an emperor who claims to be God stamped on a coin. And so they think if Jesus says, no, we absolutely should not do that, well, then the Herodians are going to go back to Pilate and to Herod and to Caesar, and Jesus will be in trouble. Now, if Jesus then says it's fine to pay taxes, then he knows he'll be in trouble with his own people. So Jesus turns it back to the Pharisees, and he says to them, well, show me a coin. And lo and behold, guess what the Pharisees are carrying around with them? The coins with Caesar's image stamped on them. So all of a sudden they realize they're caught up in all of this because they've got the very coins on them. They want Jesus to say that nobody should carry around with them. And so when he looks at the coin and he asks whose image it is, we get that tremendous line that Jesus says, then give to the emperor the things that are the emperor's. And it would be enough, but then Jesus says, and give to God the things that are God's. And then Jesus stops talking And now we've been trying to figure this out for the last 2,000 years. And so what does that mean for us? Where does it leave us in all of this now? And what is our response supposed to be? It would appear that Jesus was not completely opposed to paying taxes. And although I don't know people who really relish in the idea of paying taxes, a question that I might ask this morning is, anybody drive on a road to get here? Anybody build those roads voluntarily out of the goodness of your own heart in order for us to be able to get here today? Anybody go to a water fountain to get a drink of water this morning, or fill up a water bottle, or even do that in your own home and be a little grateful that there might be people out there who work on a water system that provides clean water and sanitation for us? Anybody been picked up by an ambulance at any point in their life, or know a loved one who was, or had the fire department respond to them in some way? When all of that happens, we realize that yes, there is a reason that we pay taxes. And we would know in today's world that that also cares for people who are elderly, who might not have a safe place to be, and they care for the people who are around us. And all of the ways civil servants care for us, this is a part of what Jesus might have been saying to the people, is we realize there's a place. Now, you don't have to be happy about the image stamped on the coin or on the dollar bill even. But there is something about our life together that we realize might not be entirely disrespectful. But then, Jesus doesn't leave it there. He does tell the people, so give to God the things that are God's. And now we've had to figure out what that means. What does that mean for us? It could have been so easy if Jesus would have just been formulaic at this point. So I realize you have to pay taxes and we can't get around it. And let's just hope that even a tyrant like Caesar does something good with that money for people. But then also realize that we have a responsibility to the temple. There even is a temple tax at that point, rather than just the generosity that flows from people. Although that certainly was true as we hear about the widow's offering and so forth. But Jesus then could have come and say, but this is how it works. So you get down and you figure out your income. And then you realize you do have to pay taxes, but you still have lots of money left over for yourself. And then we should go back to the Old Testament principles of tithing. And you should consider that as a gift to the temple or the church that now can go about doing God's work. But after that, you should still be concerned about how you spend your own money and what you do with that and what benefit it might bring to the world. And not only that, you might even consider how it is you get your money. The labors that you go through, are those pleasing to God? And so many other ways. And we don't hear any of that from Jesus. Simply give to God the things that are God's. And so maybe it means we have to find our own formula. We have to find out how it is that we are drawn into this very discourse. What does it mean for us to understand the blessings of God? And what does it mean for us to know that somehow those blessings are returned in a way that creates God-pleasing work in the world? And for that might be exactly what Paul was writing to the church in Thessalonica, to unveil for us some of what's already happening. So as Gretchen read for us the opening of that letter, this is what Paul was saying to the people, that he remembers before God their work of faith. He understood that their work was a work of faith. And the way that they brought that to the world was such a faithful response themselves. But he doesn't stop there. He also says that their labors were labors of love. And he understands that the things that they were doing in their community and beyond their community were actual labors of love. And what that brought to the whole community was a steadfastness of hope. That just sounds so beautiful. When Jesus would lay it to us, it could be as if Paul was thinking about Jesus saying, give to God the things that are God's. And we might realize that faith is God's to have, and God just faithfully shares that faith with us so that we can be faithful in return. And it creates this whole sense of community around us. And then when we faithfully enter into labor, people see those as labors of love. They see the way joy that we are alive in the community and what we are doing, and it can bring to people such hope for their lives to understand that the very work that we are doing can actually bring hope into those who are feeling despair. And when Paul goes on to continue to write about this, he talks about receiving the word with joy. And then he said to them, when you're doing all of those things, realize this: you are an example. You are a living example of what it means to turn your lives over to God. And maybe this clincher at the end. Paul says, I remember how you turned to God away from idols to serve a living and a true God. And that's not what was stamped on the coins. Caesar was not a true God. He might have been alive, but he was not the living God who called on people to be faithful, to have labors of love, to be an example and steadfast hope for the community that rested in God alone. And so as we've spent 2,000 and plus years figuring out what does it mean to give God, to God the things that are God's, it starts with understanding that we have the one true God who is alive among us. And when we live in that faith, everything we do will be an example of living in love. Everything that we do has the possibility of bringing hope into someone's life. Jesus was asked a very simple question. And we now have a very complicated response. Maybe we should just make it a little less complicated and just do this. Allow your labors to be labors of love. Allow your faith to be steadfast. Know that you are an example for the world, bringing hope to somebody who just might be in despair. And when we do that, I believe Jesus will say, there, you've done it. There it is. You've given to God the things that are God's. What an example for the world. Amen.